What's going on, guys? We are back. We were talking... Oh, I should turn on my light, my fancy light. There we go. The European Regional 3 and what do teams need to make the major for top 16, which is very important. So we're going to be talking about that, about the point system and the tiebreaker situations, and so you guys can tell what you want from this weekend, who you're rooting for, where you want them to place, yada, yada. So this weekend is actually a 4-day weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the European Regional 3, so it's a super week. Yeah, so before we get started, obviously there is one caveat. If the grid number 1 has not qualified, which basically just means oxygen, then there'd be top 15, and oxygen would also get in no matter what. But so let's talk about that first, and then we'll come back to these rankings. So really quick, we don't have to stay here too long. Oxygen and Vitality are basically the ones competing for the top spot there. Like technically, I think, you know, generally speaking, maybe the Giants have an outside chance to also win this, but it doesn't matter because they'll be into the major either way. So, for Oxygen, they're down 133 points, which basically means that at the bare minimum, I feel like they have to finish top 4 in these last 2 weeks of grid, so that would be 200 points. And then you would have to hope Vitality misses both brackets, which is very, very unlikely. So if that does not happen, then you're going to have to look at, like, Oxygen needs to win one of these at least, and maybe a grand finals for another. So you get, what is that, 351 points, so you'd be up to 1,121. And then Vitality, you would have to hope that they, like, fall out early. That's kind of the hope. But, like, I guess at that point, like, if they won one and made the grand finals of the other, as long as Vitality doesn't also win one, they would probably be pretty safe. An itchy nose, but for the most part, Oxygen, it's going to be a tough task. And at least I think the grid is Tuesday this week for Europe, so we will know if Oxygen still has a chance at that by the time they play. So let's come back over here to where the points are. So I ended it on Oxygen. There's obviously teams below it at 50 points and so on and down, and if they do have some crazy run, they have a chance to make the top 16. But I wanted to stop it here at these ranks. Obviously, BDS, they're safe. They're going to be probably that number 1 seed heading into the major, unless, like, they really, really do terrible here, but it's very unlikely. But basically, I would say even up to endpoint, they're probably relatively safe. Dignitas and endpoint are probably pretty safe here at 170 points. Obviously, both these teams have qualified already because they are RLCS teams, so they would at least be getting 10 points from this major, so they would bump up to 180. And that's the case with some of these teams where they don't have those automatic bid spots, then maybe they miss out on even qualifying for this regional, and then things can get a little hairy, like Rick's did last time where they didn't qualify. So when we look at this, there's 2 teams tied in the last spot, tied for 15th and 16th. Libertas and Train Hard Esport, and that's a name. To Train Hard Esport. Anyway, so they have 120 points, and very likely, I'm thinking, like, when we look at these places over here of, like, where teams can fall, I think, like, you can maybe not bank on it, but one of these 3 teams I could see not making it to the top 16 of Regional 3. Now, that's not a guarantee, but I think, you know, that's an option for some of these teams below that they can look at of, like, where we need. So 160 points-ish is probably that spot for top 16. There is a chance, obviously, they all make it, or, like, Team Singularity also does really well, so that could change. But I'm thinking, like, right around that mark is where top 16 will land, 160, 170, somewhere in that range, is what I'm thinking. Because even if Libertas and Train Yard do make it, and they finish 15th, 16th, that would be 170. So I think that's the mark that you want these teams that are outside the top 16 to try and hit. So let's say 170 for an easy like number to hit. So for Team Singularity, what they would need at the very least is probably a 12th and 14th finish. So that means they go to weekend 2, they win 1 game. That's probably the bare minimum that they would need. They already finished that in Regional 1. So I think that's the bare minimum of where they have a chance to qualify. Again, things can go hairy, but that's where I would think. Like, so it might be 160, but at the same time, that wouldn't matter for them. If they came in 15, 16, they'd be at 150. So, like, that's where Team Singularity is trying to get. They're trying to get at least a 12th place finish. Then as you go down the line, it gets even harder from there. Team Liquid, they need a lot of help. They need probably at least a 9th place finish for 180 points, and that's, again, bare minimum. Because, again, if these teams do well, like if all 4 of these teams do well, then you're in trouble, because, you know, it's gonna be tough. Like, obviously they would catch up to really no one here, like maybe a fadeaway, like if they don't make it, or barrage, if they don't make it somehow. But Dignitas and Endpoint, you would expect them to at least win one game on the first weekend, so they would be ruled out for that. So Team Liquid really looking 9th, and obviously, like, if they make it to the bracket and they get 150 points, then they're probably in. They would be at, what, 230 at that point. So, like, obviously, they wouldn't probably pass any of these teams, like maybe a Dignitas or an Endpoint. And, you know, like, if one of these guys doesn't make weekend 2, it's possible to pass them too. But for the most part, all these guys are going to move up as well. It's just they would pass definitely these guys. At least some of them, because they're not all going to make the bracket, right? So that's what Team Liquid's looking at. 9th for, like, pretty good shot. And then if you make bracket, they're basically locked in to make the major. Ricks is kind of in that same boat, that they're only 10 points down. Same with the Last Resort. They're looking at a 9th at the very least, and that's like going to be iffy. And then you're looking at a bracket stage, and then you're probably in. So that's what they're looking at. Minx and Oxygen, here's where it gets even hairier, I would say. So I don't know if a 9th will do it for Oxygen. It could. It depends, again, how these guys do. Because, like, the major problem I have with trying to move up these ranks is you have to pass... One, you have to pass everyone in front of you to top 16. So, say Oxygen does begin their climb up and, like, one of these guys falters, but what if Team Liquid has a good round? Then Team Liquid just takes over that spot for one of these guys. So that's where it gets a little bit harder. So Libertas and Train Hard would probably get, you know, again, at least a guaranteed 20 points. So for 140, and we're thinking, like, at least, you know, maybe 30, 150, and who knows higher than that. Because, again, if they do poorly, a team like Team Singularity could probably do better, and that's kind of that mix and match that we have here. It's when one team does poorly, someone's got to fill that spot. And, of course, these teams are hoping that it's someone even further below. But keep in mind, like, even if a team has no points right now, and somehow they make playoff bracket stage, that's 150 points. And that might get them in there. It'd be very, very, very tight. But it's possible. So Oxygen is in that boat of, like, they need at least a 9th, no matter what. And then that, I think that the percentages get a little bit lower because they have such little points, where it's like, oh, it still might be iffy. There might be some tiebreakers involved, which we'll talk about in a second for the people that don't know what the tiebreakers are. I should actually probably bring that up while I'm here. But let me bring this over here. But yeah, so at least the 9th, and if they do make the playoff, they're probably fine. 210 points should probably get you in. I don't think they would have to worry too much there. There's probably a small outside chance that they don't make it based on that. But you don't have to worry about, like, some people were thinking that you have to worry about making, like, top 4, which that's not the case here. Because if they had 210 points, they already move ahead of Monkeys, but then obviously Monkeys will catch up. Barrage or Fadeaway. Like, I think one of these teams could falter and get only 30 points. That's possible. And then even, like, a Dignitas or Endpoint. Like, one of these 4 will definitely falter, probably. So, one of them gets 30 points. You've already passed them. And then, obviously, these guys would have to do really, really well in order for you to not pass them, which means they would have to finish 9th. That's the only way that Oxygen, if they make bracket, does not pass these guys, is if they come in 9th, which is possible, obviously, but very unlikely that all 3 of them get 9th at the bare minimum. So I don't think you have to worry about that too much. Let me look at these tiebreakers, if I can pop these up. I don't know why this looks so weird here. Okay, so these are our tiebreakers, as of now at least. So we'll bring these up. So if a tie will occur, now when we seed a regional, we base it a little bit off grid as well, like 1/3 grid points and all that. But when it comes down to qualifying for things, it's only the points from X. There's no points from grid that are involved, because obviously that's a little bit unfair for teams that are not in grid and all that. That's also why there was only one invite spot, right? It's like, it's very invite only basically thing for this split. We'll see what happens next split, but there's still talks about what could be done, if anything. But for tiebreaker purposes, when you're tied for a major qualification spots, you will play tiebreaker games. If you're tied for any other spot, like if you're in the major and you're like tied for 4th, it'll come down to these tiebreakers. You go better a head-to-head match winning percentage in the split than for the whole season, which obviously there's only one split, so you don't have to worry about that. Then game differential during the current split. Then again, game differential for the whole season. And then it goes down to better finish in the most recent regional, basically. We have that there. So regional 3 would be that tiebreaker. And if they tied there, you go to regional 2, you go to regional 1, yada, 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 until down the line. And of course, if everything's tied, I guess, at that point, you probably coin flip. Or then go to... Well, we also have to include grid points here, so that's before this tiebreaker purposes for seeding. So that's only if they also tied in that. But if you tie for a qualification spot, sorry, this is so small, I don't know why it's like in a box, then you play a playoff. And it depends how many teams are in it, obviously. So if it's just 2 teams, easy. 1 game or 1 match, and whoever wins is in. If there's 3 teams, you go back to this tiebreakers to seed that tournament. So if there's like 3 teams, 1 team would get a bye based on these tiebreakers. So you'd have to collectively add up their head-to-heads, game differentials, yada, yada, and all of that. And then if there's 4 teams, it would just be seeded based on this. So it'd be like 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and you just play that playoff out. Now, there is a case where if a team is tied, if there's a 3-way tie for 2 spots, then whoever has the best tiebreakers will automatically get in, because they would have a bye into the finals of that tiebreaker. So they would already finish at top 2, so they wouldn't have to worry about it. So that's like the only way you can get in based on tiebreakers. But for the most part, yeah, you just play a bracket out. If there's 5 teams, same type of bracket system where you'd have 4 versus 5 would play each other to see who plays 1. 2 versus 3 play each other on the other side. So you can do as big or as small brackets as you want. Just some teams will get buys based on these tiebreakers. So that's how that works. So that's what we're looking at for this weekend. Now, when you look at it in terms of what teams could tie for the very last spot, Triple Trouble could tie like a team like Oxygen, right? If they come in and get 30 points. But it's like very unlikely that Libertas or Train Hard tie with them, just because there's a 10-point difference, and as long as they do somewhat well, they would be in those 20-point gaps. So it'd be hard to tie for that spot. So those teams very unlikely don't tie. Then it comes down to like Libertas and Train Hard probably don't tie a Dignitas either, or an endpoint, because they get at least 10 points. Maybe they tie them a little bit higher up on the leaderboards, but it wouldn't be for a top 16 spot. So we're looking at ties in like these guys around 150, 160. That's where you would probably look at for one of those spots. It's possible, obviously, that they all have bad days, and then we'll see some ties. Like, obviously, these 2 teams can tie because they're in the same spot. So that could happen. But you need some other team to come up and join them. So Team Singularity would have to come up and join them. And they have a pretty good likelihood of tying these guys because of the 20-point difference right now. When we look at the point differences here, 30, 50, 70, those are all 20-point gaps between these 3 spots. So if Team Singularity does one better than those teams, they would tie. And it's only in these spots, because then we get to 30 points, 50 points, yada, yada, and these are only 10 points. So Team Singularity, I think, has a pretty high likelihood that they could tie one of these teams. Outside of that, like, I think it could be a little bit tougher for some of these teams tied. Like, obviously, like a Team Liquid could tie if they come in 12th, and then Libertas and Train Yard, they get 30 points, and Team Singularity gets 15th. Like, that's very possible that they all tie in those spots, but it's, you really have to match up those placements well. So, like, in a world where that happens, so let's look at this. So, let's say Team Singularity They come in 15th, 16th. Team Liquid, sorry if this font gets weird. So they come in 12th, which is, but that's some likelihood there. And then Trainhard and Libertas both come in 17th. So you got 30 points there. So if that happens, we'll just add some sums here real quick. Just to show you on the paper so you can see it. So they would all have 150 points. Then Triple Trouble, why not? They come in 23rd. Let's just do it. I mean, that probably a little bit less likely for them to only get one win. But hey, they've been a little bit questionable at times. So, so you could have all these teams tied at 150. Now, teams like Oxygen can't tie them at that spot. There is no 90-point gap here, so they wouldn't tie. But same with anyone below them, actually, because there is no way to tie at 150. But then if like a brand new team comes in and scores 150, that's possible too. So I could see something like this happening. It's probably unlikely that we get 5 teams, but like say this did happen, they'd be tied for what? 13th. Oh, I'm sorry, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th. So there'd be 5 teams tied for 3 spots. So basically what that would mean is you would have a bracket like this. You would have 4th versus 5th, and they would play 1st next. And then on the other side would be 2 versus 3. Hopefully you guys can barely see this. I think so. Yeah. So this is how this bracket would play out. So whoever loses in 4th, 5th would be eliminated. And then you move on to this spot. We'll say 5th wins that game. Then you would have to do a lower bracket because we have to break that tie for 3rd. So whoever wins this game would qualify. Whoever wins this game would also qualify. And then you would have the 2 losers play. So say it was 3rd versus 5th. They would play in 1 extra game to see who gets that final spot for the major, if that did happen. So we'll see if anything like that does occur. We'll see how we handle that for stream's sake and stuff like that. We're not really sure yet. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But the one nice thing is it is very, very likely that we'll know if there's tiebreakers before the final day, right? Because the playoff bracket, if you're in the playoff bracket, you're probably not in a tiebreaker. You're probably just in the major. So we'll see how this all plays out. It's going to be very interesting to see. And also, like in this case, it could easily be Oxygen gets 100 points as well, and then they move above, and now there's only 2 spots left. So we would take out that lower bracket, which I already deleted. But, that's how it would work, just so you people know. But that is it. The European Regional 3, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll see how these teams do. Keep in mind that these points matter for the World Championship. Like, teams like BDS, sure. Like, it was like, well, they made majors, so they don't have to worry. That's not the end goal here. Like, sure, major is nice to make, but the whole point is just getting points throughout the entire season. So BDS, they want to keep increasing this gap because at the end of the day, top 6 will make a World Championship all the way down in May. And right now they have a 402-point gap there. But when they make the major, double the points. So right now we've had 2 regionals. Basically, a major will count as 2 regionals. So it'll be very, very important. Every single game will matter. That's why you want to make sure you make it to that major. Because if you don't, then the teams in front of you are guaranteed points. And they're guaranteed double points. And you're just going to be falling behind. And you'll be 33% through the season. And you're going to be like, oh boy, we need to catch up quick. We need to have really good split 2 and really good split 3 to have any chance at a World Championship. And that would be like top 4 minimum placements. So there you go. That's how it's all done. I hope you guys enjoy this Super Week, and then NA will have a Super Week the next week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's going to be a busy time ahead. But that's it for me. We'll catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.